So once the music is done, I'll start us off.
As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission. I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you're going. Better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains. Haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up. Fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah. Cause this is my road. Let's camera action, I'm ready to go. I'm never gonna give up. Fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHH LP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.
Salutations, Connecticut. Salutations, Kentucky. Salutations, New York. Salutations to the world. And Kara, salutations to Cork Island. You know, Kara's from Ireland over there. So the world is listening today. Before we start, we have a unique show today. It's a follow-up to a show that we had in December where we were looking at the teacher shortage crisis in the nation. And it had a massive audience and a good turnout. But at that end of it, we looked at the teachers that were leaving the profession right now, and we couldn't hold on to our teachers. And well, there's other issues. If you can't hold on to your teachers, we want to increase diversity in our teaching force. You can't hold on to diverse teachers. Why would I stay in a sinking ship? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But today we're going to focus on the other end of the pipeline. And I said this show is sort of like when they're burning the candle at both ends. At that five. So in the first show, it was sound of the alarm at the schoolhouse is on fire. Well, schools of ed are on fire right now as well in this piece. And so we want to talk about that today. But before we start, I want to say that in Connecticut, we wore black for our teachers on Wednesday for Safe Schools. And of course, I did a sign for them, you know, and over there, because I love teachers. And, you know, I stand with teachers. I stand with paraprofessionals. Our Hartford, Connecticut paraprofessionals make less than $250 a week. In order to survive, they have to be on food stamps. My nurses, my cafeteria workers, my bus drivers, you know, for Safe Schools. But just wanted to give a shout out, you know, it was my sign yesterday to help out with our teachers. But today, we're going to talk about the teacher shortage, the coming crisis. And I believe that this is going to be the biggest threat to public education in our nation right now. And I brought on three of my heroes over here today. So let me allow them to introduce themselves. So I'm going to go in order. Like when I look at my screen, I see Dean Vasquez-Helig, and then I see Dr. Denisha Jones and Dr. Kara Mokai. So we'll begin with you, Julian. And on this show, we say, first, tell us who you are and give us a little bit of your passion.
Oh, great. Well, welcome. You know, thank you for welcoming to the show. You're one of my heroes too, Jesse. So I appreciate you bringing me back. I'm Julian Vasquez-Helig, Dean of the College of Education at the University of Kentucky. I'm also honored to serve as the Education Chair for the Kentucky NAACP. And you know, what am I passionate about? I'm passionate about making sure that students, especially historically marginalized students, have opportunities to thrive and to learn and live the lives that they desire.
All right, thank you. Denisha, you're up, sister.
Thank you so much, Jesse. You are an inspiration, the walking man Turner. My name is Denisha Jones, and I'm the director of the Art of Teaching program at Sarah Lawrence College. And I wear many hats. I'm also the co-director of Defending the Early Years. But one of the things I'm passionate about is my work with Black Lives Matter at School, where we are trying to elevate the lives of our Black children, all children, but we focus on Black children in schools because we know that when we lift the boats of the most marginalized, we lift up everyone. And so I'm inspired by that. I'm inspired by revolutionizing early childhood through something that we all have at our disposal, which is play. Self-determined, self-directed play that ignites children to really unleash their potential. And so thank you for being here. And I'm excited about preparing teachers, though I am troubled by the challenges that we're facing.
With the power, Dr. Mokai.
Hi, Jesse. So good to be here. Thank you. So I work with Jesse at Central Connecticut State University. And also like Jesse, I am in the Department of Literacy, Elementary Education, and Early Childhood Education. I'm currently also serving as the director of our Central Teachers Committee. We call it C10. And it basically coordinates and works with our teacher education programs, with our district partners, and with our disciplinary partners across the campus. And my passion, definitely, students drive it for me. Similar to what Julian Vasquez was saying, I agree. I mean, making sure that our students are getting what they need, and ensuring then, I guess, from our end that we're helping our teacher candidates become, not only compassionate educators, but critical educators, creative educators, so that we can, take care of our young people and get them where they need to be.
He's a critical educator, which is sorely needed at our school. So we love having Kara at our school, Dr. Mokai. You've been an inspiration for many. What I want to ask us today, because this is a question that I've been engaged with teachers across the country, and I do have a large following of teachers, and they're reporting when I talk about the shortage, and Julian and Denisha we'll start with Julian this time, then we'll go to Denisha and Kara, then we'll reverse it, we'll move it around. I only asked for 3 guests today because the last time we did 6, and I didn't get enough of Julian on there, so I need just to have time. So I'm sorry, but bringing us back. But what the teachers are telling me, the current teachers are telling me, this isn't a shortage. This is a teacher flight. This is the flight due to bad policies, inequities. You're not giving us the resources. You're not fully funding our schools. We're leaving. You're disrespecting us. So that's part of it. And there's another. And my wife is a teacher, so And there was a point where I thought, hey, to my daughter, why don't you be a teacher? Because I do like teaching. And my wife said no. And then I was at a barbecue with a bunch of Hartford teachers. So Hartford teachers are urban teachers in Connecticut. And there must have been about 20 of them. This was pre-COVID. So not that we were doing any unsafe gathering. But of all the 20 teachers, none of them were recommending teaching to their students. And so they're telling me this isn't a teacher shortage. This is a manufactured flight. So Julian, I want to know, what is your impression of it? Is this just me being crazy?
So my welcome to Kentucky example was I went down to the local car dealership, and my car salesman asked me what I did, and I told him I was the new dean of the College of Education. And he said, "Oh, great! I was a student in the College of Education." And I said, "You were a student in the College of Education?" He said, "Yes, my mother is a Kentucky teacher, and she told me that I needed to leave the College of Education and go into business." That was my welcome to Kentucky. Now, yesterday, I got a call from the local NBC affiliate, and they wanted to talk about the teacher shortage. There's also a substitute shortage. There's not just a teacher shortage, there's a substitute shortage too. As you're seeing in Ohio, if you're over 18, you don't even need a degree. You just need a warm body, okay? This is a real concern. So the reporter was asking about data going back several decades. And I thought to myself, that is something we really need to take a look at. So I dug into the data, and it turns out in the 1970s, that teaching was one of the most popular majors in higher education, literally one of the most popular majors. But you see a steady decline from 1975 to the mid 80s, where the number of teacher majors is cut in half. And then you see a further decline. For example, in our college, the last 10 years, you see a rapid decline. Now, Jesse, before this, we got on and we were talking, you said, we need some positive news. Okay, so I'm going to try to sprinkle in the positive as we go here, because this is a very serious situation. You talked about the confluence of events that is causing the shortage of teachers and substitutes. The situation really is dire, but I understand that we need some positive today. So here's that positive. Here at the College of Education, we have stabilized that drop. Over the last 3 years, we're at about 1,200 teachers or so in our college. Okay? And we've stabilized that because what we found is that this generation of students, the millennials, the Generation Zs, that they really want to make a difference. And so what we're trying to do is appeal to that piece, right? They understand the challenges with pensions and with $40,000 starting teacher pay, all of those things. I mean, that's all out there. Testing policies that have been onerous the last 2 decades, those things are out there. But what we've been trying to pitch to these students is that education really is the compass of our democracy, and that you are on the front lines of our nation's challenges in that work. So all the COVID policies, I mean, we saw what was happening in Chicago recently. These are things that are discouraging to educators. However, I truly believe that if we appeal to this generation of students and young people and ask them to commit to doing this work, they're responding. Now, while we've stabilized, we haven't increased. And so we still have much more work to do, but we have stabilized that drop.
We need that. We need that. Dr. Jones, take us.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with a lot of what Julian has said, but I also want to, remind us that before the pandemic and the CRT boogeyman, things weren't that great either, right? Like I remember when I was at Howard University and we would do this thing where we would invite the incoming students and their families in that move-in weekend. And traditionally, it was always like this lineage where it was like grandma, mom, and student, all teachers, right? Or auntie, mama, and right? They were the lineage from teachers. And I remember at this point, and this was like 2011, 2012, where there were parents who were like discouraging their children from going into teaching, right? So, because we have to remember that we had the No Child Left Behind, the reforms, the standardized testing, the accountability. We already had people fed up with what was being done to education. And then you add a global pandemic on top of it, where people are still stuck in this either or thinking, either schools are open or schools are closed, but there's no in between, right? We don't have that both and the disrespect of people thinking that they have the right to review teachers' lessons plans to make sure they're not teaching anything they don't want every child to learn, right? It's just gotten out of control. So I think it's been a long process, and I think this is a turning point, right? It is frustrating and it is hard to see teachers being demoralized, whether it's news pundits who are safely working remotely, disparaging teachers who don't want to go into COVID petri dish classrooms and risk themselves and their families, right? And so, but I do see hope because my students who are in the program, though we don't have as many as we like, are committed to doing this work, right? I just recently was writing up their narrative evaluations from the past semester, and I'm reading their work, and they're light years ahead of where I was when I was in their position in my program, right? They're embracing abolitionist teaching and strengths-based education and equitable education, and they're worried. Don't get me wrong, they are stressed out and worried, but they are so much more ahead of the curve that I think if we can weather this storm, when we weather the storm, they're going to be in a position to really take things. So I think we have to continue what we're doing, which is producing teachers, not just early childhood teachers, but all teachers who are prepared for this fight. But we have to ease up on what we are expecting them to take on when we get out there. It is not fair. And I don't feel good sometimes saying, I used to say, look, if you love what you do, you're going to deal with the low pay. You're going to deal with the lack of, prestige, right? Because you're going to love what you do and you're going to see the value of teaching and learning and you're going to be so immersed in that. That's getting harder and harder to sell to these young people, right? Because it's not enough to love what you do and to be good at it and to be committed to teaching and education if the rest of the world is just pretty throwing you under the bus, right? And so we have to find ways to really sustain that passion that they bring in and not expect them to just put their heads down and not really look at it. A teacher, close your door and that doesn't work anymore, right? You can't just ignore what's happening around the world. So I hope that we can collectively come together and say, we owe our future teachers and our current teachers more than what they're getting. And we have a responsibility to fix these things before it gets out of hand and public education as we know it doesn't come back from this assault.
I love it. We got some positive stuff for these millennials. That's it. All right, Dr. Mokari, take us your perspective on this.
I agree with everything that has been said. And even as I was kind of preparing and thinking about today's program, I was really conflicted as to, what we were going to be talking about, in the sense of, given the landscape and the current climate in education, it's really hard to make that argument and advocate for bringing, young people into the profession, because that it's a tough place right now. And so and yet at the same time, I'm an educator myself. I would choose this career all over again. I don't have any regrets about it. I love it, and I find myself very fortunate to be in the position that I am, and have met the wonderful young people that I've met, and now graduate students and undergraduates. So, I've kind of run the gamut. So I've benefited hugely from this career, and I've enjoyed it. It's been very personally rewarding for me. So I find myself in this very, very weird place with regards to knowing what education can hold for us, both as a country, but also as individuals and as, communities. But the struggles are real, and we can't ignore those, and we can't, pretend that those don't exist as well. And so how do we balance both of these things? Two very different things can be true simultaneously. And how do we make sense of all of this becomes a real challenge, I believe. So one of the things that I just kind of keep saying to myself, and keep in mind for myself, and hopefully convey on to my own students, is the notion that yes, we're in very tough times, and absolutely, when we look at education from a critical perspective, there's lots to be critical of. And we can certainly see how, in many cases, education just perpetuates what has already gone before. And we are manufacturing our own prices at the moment, I believe, with regards to this teacher shortage. But on the other hand, education does still, at least I hope, I want to hold on to it very strongly, have the potential to be transformative and transforming. And so we need to hold on to those sparks and those important pieces, because that's what moves us forward. And I agree with Denisha, like, looking at the young people who are coming in, they're so excited and they're full of energy, and they are critically minded, and they are socially aware, and they want to be involved. And so I hold on to this, and that's what we need to look at moving forward. And that's exactly who we need in the field of education too. We need people who are ready to work hard and to be creative, but at the same time be critical and be compassionate. Because that's what we need in education. We need a lot of energy and a lot of socially aware action.
So what I'm hearing is from all three of you is that what will inspire new teachers, a mission driven. I can relate to that. So Julian, I was that new 70s kid in the School of Education back then, when everybody, or not everybody, but most of us wanted to be teachers. So I'm just an old ghetto kid who either were going to be a teacher, a policeman, or a fireman, or a nurse. We didn't have bigger aspirations back then, but teacher was like the thing, and we definitely were mission driven. Oh, in that sense. And one of the reasons that I became a teacher was Mrs. Stanfield. Mrs. Stanfield. And in my K-12 experience, I had one Black teacher. Mrs. Stanfield was that teacher. Mrs. Stanfield was our high school honors English teacher. And because she was our high school English teacher, there was no Common Core. She had a curriculum of her own. So we knew Marcus Garvey. We knew Frederick Douglass. We knew everybody. We knew Jose Marti. We read all the great ones. But I'm just saying, and I remember when I was going to school, and she said, Jesse, why don't you be a teacher? And I said, well, I don't know. I think I should be a lawyer. And she said, no, you should be a teacher. And I asked her, well, what's that? She said, because a lot of your friends are not going to make it. And she said, and you need to go step forward. You need to be part of the mission to save the others. And then when I finished my PhD, I came back to New Jersey. That's where I'm from. And went back to my old friends, and we were gathering the old football team, and we were a great football team. And I found out that 2/3 of the members of my football team were either incarcerated, long-term incarcerated, or dead from overdoses or violence. And I know my mission. My mission is I want to save everyone. So I love that concept. But I want to be cognizant of another issue, something that Karen Lewis, that Chicago Teachers Union president, shining star, and Karen has passed away, but Karen was an inspiration to the nation, to every teacher. And she reminded us that a teacher's working conditions are a child's learning conditions. And I want to bring us into, the Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools. I think it's 2017, they did a report that looked at how underfunded our Black and brown schools are, our impoverished schools, our urban schools, our rural schools. And it was massive. And they talked about the Elementary and Secondary Act. And that act was supposedly in the initial, they bring us back to the birth of it, and it was supposed to give 45% increase of funding to poor schools. Yeah. It never did that. Yeah. But it did give them tutors for math, reading, that kind of stuff over there. And No Child, Denisha said it, No Child Left Behind changed that whole thing. Yeah. All of a sudden we shifted to, let's get everybody on a test score. So I want us to think about that. I want people to become teachers. I can't think of a better profession to be in. I want mission-driven teachers. If you're just here for the job and the paycheck, I don't want you in the classroom. I don't want you in our schools. There's too much at risk. But I need to have schools that have the resources. We don't send our soldiers, say, here's a wooden stick, go fight the war for us. Here, we got some firecrackers. You don't need cannons over there. We don't do that. But we have teachers teaching, and this is my career. I'm an urban teacher. I bought the books. Yeah. I bought the paper. I bought the pencils. I made the copies. I went to Kinko's. I paid for the color copies. I did that over there. And it is time that we start giving our teachers the resources and fully funding our schools. So I want to ask you this question. If we gave our teachers, our Black and brown teachers, our white teachers, our Asian teachers, our Latino teachers, if we gave them the resources that they needed to succeed, would we be in this teacher shortage? I'm going to start with you this time, Denisha, then I'm going to go to Karen, then I'm going to go to Julia. If we really truly funded our schools, because I'm the first to tell you, we've never provided equal funding. This school is 1849, we're 173 years old, and we've never had equitable funding. So Denisha, if we made equitable funding, we fully funded our school, would it be easier to attract new teachers?
It would be. I think it would help a lot, but funding only goes so far, right? I think, yes, we need money and we need resources, but we can have all the money in the world and still spend it on the wrong things, right? Like, I don't want more money if it's going to mean more testing, right? Like, I don't want more money if it's going to mean more standards and more accountability and not like supporting teachers, right? So yes, teachers deserve to be paid more, but where that money goes is really important, And you talked about, who you want in the classroom. And I think this is, to me, where teacher education is going to need to take a line in the stand, right? Like we're dealing with all these people, fighting against, teaching the truth, calling it divisive concepts. Look, if you can't commit to being an anti-racist, you don't belong in our schools, right? If you can't commit to supporting LGBTQ students, you don't belong in our schools. If you can't commit to supporting immigrant students and their families, you don't belong in our schools. The same way we would say, if you don't believe in supporting special needs students, you don't belong in our schools, right? We have to draw a line in the sand, right? So do we need more money for that to support people? Absolutely. But I just think we get lost in thinking that money's going to solve everything if we don't consciously think about what we do with that money, right? How many school districts spend thousands of dollars for people to come in and make teachers' lives miserable with horrible PD and requirements that are just ridiculous, right? Like, so yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, Jeffy. It's complicated for me because I'm not saying money doesn't matter. It does. But how we spend the money is super important. And I don't trust the powers that be to spend the money in ways that matter to children and teachers, right? To improve those learning conditions that you mentioned, right? If we're going to spend the money for ventilation, right? So kids have windows and can breathe fresh air in their classrooms, so they have space to move about, right? So they have state-of-the-art technology, awesome places to do theater and music, absolutely. But if we're going to spend the money on more Pearson textbooks and scripted curriculums and that sort of thing, then I think we're going to find ourselves still not able to meet the challenges of recruiting high quality teachers.
Well, we can give a little amen there in that piece. Dr. Mokai, we're going to ask you, if we had equitable funding for our schools, would that help attract new teachers?
Well, just as Denisha said, I agree with everything she said. I mean, it's one piece of the puzzle, but it's not the whole puzzle. And so, how that funding gets spent is hugely important. And our students and our families really benefiting from it, as well as our teachers, becomes a really important question to consider and to look at how it's being spent. The other thing too, I think that we need to look at is, teacher voice and teacher autonomy. And, our teachers involved in the creation of curriculum and what's being taught and how it's being taught, because that's also a real component that isn't necessarily always tied to funding. It's impacted by it because it provides the resources that they need or the professional development that might be needed, but it also recognizes teachers as professionals. We need to give more credit to the teachers as the professionals that they are and recognize them for that, include them in, policy decisions, curricula decisions, and really pay attention to what they bring to the field. They are the experts in the classroom. They are the ones who are working with the students. And so oftentimes their voices aren't heard and they don't necessarily have a say in the curriculum, how it's rolled out, how it's developed, and so on and so forth. And so funding is a huge piece of it, and how that funding is spent is really important. But I also think how we treat teachers and respect them from a professional perspective is also really important.
So it brings us to Mr. Policy. Before our graduate, Miguel Cardona, became the United States Secretary of Education, I had my choice, and it was Julian. That's who I wanted. This is Mr. Equity. This is the person that understands policy. This is the data junkie that digs into the stuff that tells us about the night. So Julian, could you tell us about that part? Connect it. I want you to do a little different. Connect it to some policy and the funding piece.
Yeah, and before I dig into the policy, I just don't want to pass this by. The first thing I thought about, Jesse, when I looked at that data about the 1970s, I wanted to ask you about your experience and why you chose teaching. And so I want to thank you for sharing that with me. I appreciate it. So first, just to talk about Denisha's comments, she talked about the accountability of funding. What a lot of people don't know is that No Child Left Behind was born in Texas in the early 1990s, and it came in an ed finance bill. So accountability and school funding have been tied together since they first became policy. So I think a lot of people don't know that that's the case. And so, there's always strings attached when you get new funding. Look, we're going to do this to your pensions, or we're going to do this to the testing system, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's quite unfortunate that oftentimes when we see these increases in funding, they come with these sort of onerous strings attached. Now, I think we just need to be honest here with the listeners. The teacher shortage and the substitute shortage, it's not the same in poor and rich communities. It's not the same. There's a $23 billion difference in majority white districts and majority minority districts in funding. There's recent research that documents that nationally. 23 billion, that's billion with a B. And so those shortages are not the same everywhere. And when you have, a couple of $100 difference in per pupil spending for each classroom, as you aggregate that by classroom, by school, and by district, that means that you can buy different things when you're a wealthy district. And so a lot of times what you see teachers cut their teeth in large districts like the Houston Independent School District, and then they move to the outer lying suburban districts. And so you have a constant revolving door of educators in these large urban districts. And not only that, we had opportunities. We had opportunities to bring talented people into the classroom, things like Teach for America. But what Teach for America did is they ran on an approach that this is just a temporary thing. So all of those teachers for decades from Teach for America that have been going into the classrooms that could have become teachers, that could have stayed in the classroom, 30% of those teachers stayed in education. So you have a full 70% of teachers that could have been in education, opportunities that we could have had for other teachers that Teach for America didn't allow us that ability. Now, I also think it's important, we have a particularly acute shortage of teachers of color. I think we have to say that here. here in Kentucky, 80 to 90% of our teachers are white, whereas almost a quarter of our students are teachers of color. And you have a school board member from a suburban district in Houston saying this week that, well, look at the Houston school district. They have 30%, 36% African-American teachers. Their dropout rate is 4%. Do we want to be the Houston school district? So here we are pushing against not only the challenge of bringing teachers in, but you have these structural roadblocks as school board members and districts that are refusing to hire teachers of color even when we produce them. So there's these sort of perfect storms. So and then finally, one last thought on policy. Jesse joined a panel that we did yesterday with legislators from across the nation. And I was expecting to hear, and these are legislators that are close and dear to my heart, I was expecting to hear some fantastic ideas that are going on in legislatures in my state and other states to address the teacher shortage. And there was literally crickets, silence. Legislators are not even thinking about the teacher or substitute shortage in a way that's articulated to address the issues. Literally, the only thing we've been talking about is lowering the age of substitutes to 18 so that anybody can become a substitute. Or how do we expand hire companies to expand alternative pathways? There is nothing being articulated in legislatures right now. So I think that's what the public, we need to go to our legislators with good ideas. We've got to move beyond pilot approaches. We've got to think about how is it that we fund colleges of education differently so that becoming a teacher has more value added to it. We know from the research that the amount of debt that teachers take on to go to some of these schools and to become teachers later really hamstrings their finances for decades. So we have got to figure out ways to make high quality teacher education affordable, because there's lots of fly-by-night programs out there that'll put you on the internet for 30 hours and charge you $2,000. There's a lot of that out there, but we need to make sure that we have educators that are prepared as they can be from day one, because no educator is prepared from day one, not even higher education professors. So we have got to address this lack of inaction. We have got to get good ideas in legislature, because we think that the teacher shortage is bad now. Jesse, you opened this conversation with people who are thinking about retiring right now. Now, Diego Bernal, who's a state representative representing San Antonio, said in the panel yesterday, we have got to ask teachers right now, what is it going to take for you to stay in the profession? Policymakers have got to be wrestling with that right this moment.
And that's an amen. One of the things now, I said I don't want us to be doom and gloom. And I know we have some real issues, but there are people working on things. So I'm in the state of Connecticut. Connecticut is one of the strangest states, wealthiest state in the nation. It has the biggest income gap there is. And we have more alternate routes to become teachers. For instance, we've got a graduate one relay where only 45% of their students pass the certification exam. And it's been going on for 8 years. It's not a university, it's not a college. It somehow certifies teachers for charter schools over there. And I don't really want to get on that piece, but I'd say we've known there's been a shortage. And in my state, the idea is create some kind of program rather than go to the schools like our school that has been in this business for 173 years. Rather than go to the schools of education and partner with them, they'd rather spend millions of dollars elsewhere. But I want to get to a positive. Dr. Mokari, we're working on some legislation. Can you help us out? We're hoping over there, because Julian, what you ended with, the death, we're trying to work with our legislators, and we're trying to introduce a piece of legislation that we think will help not only bring teachers in, but keep old teachers in. Okay, Kara, can you share a little bit about that? That let's get some free tuition service. What were we calling it?
A collaborative, I believe, to support teachers as they enter teacher preparation programs. It's in the early days. So myself and Jesse, along with several other colleagues, Carol Cioto, Amanda Greenwell, and Joss French, we've been working on drafting, I guess, a proposal for a bill that would provide funding for prospective teacher candidates. that would allow them to come into the profession and be hopefully completely funded as they make their way through this profession. And then there would be some give and take, obviously, with regards to how that would work out. But recognizing the fact that, the financial component is huge, especially for minority teacher candidates who are interested in entering the field, but taking on huge debt is not fair to expect of them. And so trying to think of ways that we can make this more accessible and more affordable, and also supportive for them as they go through the program. So we're in the early days, but we do have something drafted, and we hope to start taking it to the legislature and the legislators shortly. I believe that's our plan, Jesse.
No, we're ready, and we have legislators in mind, allies, that we can work on. And the teacher shortage now that's what drove us to it. We also, in that component, we're asking for service. And we're also asking for teachers currently who have to, in Connecticut, you have to get a master's degree within 6 years to get your professional certification. So we're asking for free tuition for them and the undergraduates. But we're also, we want to add, we're calling it a professional fellowship. And we're saying there's going to come some service. If you want into this, give us 10 hours a week tutoring it out of school for our undergraduates. Do that. If you're when you graduate, stay for 5 years, stay for 6 years in our priority school district. So we got components to it in that piece. And I'm hopeful for the legislation. I'm hopeful for it. We're not giving up, but I want to bring us to that point. So that's one positive. Julian, I'm going to go to you because you've got that wonderful Civil Rights Institute. So when you talk about the mission, so I know Vincent, you were on my show talking about the NAAC partnership with the School of Ed at the University of Kentucky. And I'm proud to say we now have a John Lewis Institute at our university. So we're going to be talking to you. But tell us about how that mission gets joined together with a partnership with the NAACP and civil rights, because that is going to bring people in to me.
Yeah. So I think part of it is working with the National NAACP. So the National NAACP just appointed a new national education chair, which is Ivory Tolson, who is at Howard University, and before that worked in the White House. And he's done a lot of research, especially on HBCUs sending students into teaching, especially Black males. It turns out in HBCUs, for Black males, teaching is still a very prominent choice in HBCUs. So I think we need to highlight the important work that HBCUs are doing and how key they are in terms of diversifying the profession. So let me say that first. I think that the second piece is, how is it that we can work with individual states? For example, the education chair from New Jersey, Tom Puryear, he was at the Education Deans for Justice and Equity. We have been talking about how do we put together a set of principles that all colleges of education can be committed to? Because a lot of times, I don't know if you've noticed this, I've noticed this, universities do a lot of talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? A lot of talking. And oftentimes you see very little action. So one of the ideas that Tom and I talked about is the NAACP state conferences, working with the Civil Rights Center and Education Deans for Justice and Equity to put together a set of principles, a set of goals for all colleges of education to meet in terms of diversity in their teacher workforce. So stay tuned for that. Those are the kinds of things that collaborations can bring to fruition. Collaborations with NAACP, with the center, and with state conferences of the NAACP, and an association of deans of colleges of education across the nation. That's the kind of stuff that we're working on.
So education is civil rights. Denisha, I want to connect because another positive for me is when you talk about abolitionist teaching, when you talk about, if you're not an anti-racist teacher, what are you doing in the school? If you can't value and uplift our LGBTQ students, if you can't, our special needs students, if you can't do that, you don't deserve to be there. But you have what I feel like this young lady is involved in everything. United to Save Our Schools, Black Lives Matter at schools, the Defend the Early Years. I mean, tell us about, I think that's part of the answer. All three of you are bigger than the job you do at the School of Ed. And Denisha, there's no more, I don't even know how 24 hours in a day that you do it, but tell us how, because I tell my teachers now, if you only defend your students at the schoolhouse door and you don't defend them outside the schoolhouse, then you're not doing your job. Well, tell us about that other piece, because I think that's inspiring. That's inspiring to me.
Thank you, Jesse. Yeah, I think it's been, I mean, what I try and show my students is that I think for, 18 years in higher ed now and working closely with teachers, the ones I see that are still committed, or doing the work are the ones who are invested in not just the school, right, but in this way of life, right? Like, they have to see that if all you do is show up and teach and go home, like, you're gonna burn out because it's too much. You have to be invested, right? So despite all of the challenges, right, we still have teachers across the country organizing the Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action and Year of Purpose, right? And they do this on their own time and the resources because they value it and they know it's important and they're committed, and they create a network to sustain themselves. And that's what I really want my students to see, right? Like in New York, we have the New York Collective of Radical Educators, right? That's an amazing resource of educators across the 5 boroughs, right? Who are working hard to support each other and support their students. And you need that kind of network. They used to have the most amazing in-person conference because COVID, messed that up, that I would come from DC on the train at 5 o'clock in the morning to attend because it was spectacular, right? It was just a great feeling of this whole day being together in this school, hearing from teachers doing this amazing work. So, I kind of model that if I didn't have my connections to badass teachers and defending the early years and uniting to save our schools, if I was just doing my job of just recruiting students and teaching them, I would be very disconnected from what it actually takes to thrive in this work. We want to get to a place where we're thriving, right? Right now, we're barely surviving. And so we got to do more. We got to listen to Dr. Bettina Love and her abolitionist teaching. We want to do more than survive, right? What does it mean to thrive in education? It means to be fully prepared. My undergrad teacher education program was good, but it didn't give me, I was less like, is this what it means to be a teacher? Like, I felt like there was a little piece missing, like the reality wasn't there, right? And I try and tell my students, you will not come out of my program without the reality of what you were about to face, because it's hard to stay grounded when you don't have that, right? But you have to be able to reach across to collectively organize with other people and to understand how important that is. Like, I have a colleague right now who's dealing, her Palestinian students are feeling not safe in her school, and we have to support them. And to see everyone in that group come together, we met with their students over Zoom. They were so like, thank you, grown up, for meeting with us and listening to us and hearing us. We don't work in their school. We're not there in their lives, but we know their lives matter and we want to support them. And so it's just one example. I also want to say just briefly, we at Sarah Lawrence and in New York, we are doing things to think about the teacher shortage, right? Like New York State, and maybe this is just because we finally got a new governor, Governor Hochul, right? But we're getting rid of the Ed TPA. I'm sorry, that is a barrier to teacher recruitment and teacher placement. It's gone. They're going to have us create, surprise, surprise, colleges of education can create their own assessment to determine if students have met the requirements and make it a program requirement and not a state mandate. I had so many teachers not get licensed because of something like the Ed TPA preventing them from getting that license and from doing it. And it's gone, right? We're removing the GRE requirement. It wasn't, I thought it was across every grad program in the state of New York had to mandate the GRE for entrance. No. Colleges of education had to mandate the GRE for entrance exam. So we don't trust teachers to come out of their undergrad programs with a 3.0 GPA and not need the GRE. Right? It's a barrier, right? And it made no sense. So that's out of the way. At Sarah Lawrence, we're partnering with our community colleges to create a pipeline so that those students can come to us after they finish their community college and get a bachelor's and a master's in 3 years, right? We are trying to reduce the cost of our program, right? Our current students right now at Sarah Lawrence can get their bachelor's and their master's in teaching in 5 years. That's a whole year that you don't have to spend on your education, and get it done in 5 years, reduce the cost, and and be, 23 with a master's degree in teaching and ready to go on and take the world. There's so many things that we can do, but we have to collaborate. We have to work with those other organizations, those other people. And I'm so fortunate that, we live that model at Sarah Lawrence. We work with diverse groups and we reach out and we're trying to connect and to share the resources and to share the problems, right? We can't do this by ourselves. I think that's what I try and model, that if you're just on an island by yourself teaching, you're gonna drown. You need other people. You need to be in a collective space with other people in the struggle to actually get to a place where we can all thrive together.
All right. So we've got this. I'm gonna shift us a little, but I did a show last year with former students and teachers that I work with, teachers of color. And we talked about how do we recruit, and they really wanted to talk about how do we keep teachers of color in the classroom. So Rose Riez is a bilingual teacher, a badass bat, you know her, Denisha, a town councilwoman for the Working Families Party. I don't think the woman sleeps either. But Rose said something on the show when I said, well, can we give free education to our diverse students? Can we do this? And she said, if you're going to let the school sink, what makes you think that teachers of color are going to stay in that school? And Rose has been mentoring teachers in Willimantic, which is one of our poorest communities in Connecticut. And she's been mentoring the new teachers, and some of them were Teach for America teachers, some of them were traditional teachers. And Rose has never had anyone stay. They leave. They either leave for another district over there or they leave. And she said, if you want to save our schools, you need to save them for all the teachers. So that's one component over there. And we're coming to the time where I want us to end with a hallelujah moment. So I'm an old little Bible crazy kid, an amen moment. So I want you to give us our best shout of hope. So this one, I'm going to start with you, Julian. And I asked you three to be on this show because you are the most hopeful people I know in schools of ed. I have a lot of people who are dying to retire. I'm 66. I don't want to retire. I'm like, hey, I can hang around. This is good. I got a mission. I got to fight over there. But Julian, give us that hope for the future. That's a big question now.
You're asking me to solve some big problems in the next 30 seconds. I think we know what works. We know what matters to teachers. We know why they're leaving. These are things that we know, right? And our policymakers, our superintendents, our school boards have just failed to be attentive to those things. We know that education reform has been onerous. High stakes testing, standardized curriculum. We know that teacher pay lags far behind that of other college educated professionals. And we know that the opportunities to have career advancement in education are problematic. We know that teachers tell us that poor leadership in their building is one of the biggest problems that they face. We know what the problems are, but yet we've lacked the will to make the investments in those things. And that's not even mentioning the things that are happening outside of school and driving poverty, because healthy schools sit in healthy communities. So we literally know what the issues are, but yet we as a society, we as policymakers and leaders and stakeholders have yet to find the political will to press for those things that we know matter. And so that's where I think we need to have those conversations with our legislators, with our school board members, with our superintendents, which is that all of these fly-by-night, inexpensive solutions, changing the age of substitutes, alternative pathways, all of these things that are the sexiest things out there right now. None of those get us to where we want to go. And so what we have got to do is we have to truly be committed to having a high quality, experienced teacher in front of every student in every community, not just wealthy communities, because wealthy communities are not struggling with any of the things that we're talking about right now. There's other things that they struggle with, but not the things that we're talking about right now. So let's find the political will to inspire our leaders to do the right thing.
We can't do better than that. Kara, give us that piece, give us that, come on, this is the challenge and we can do it. And Julian, you were right on target. Sure.
This is the challenge, we can do it. Well, I would focus back to, one of the things that I've loved most about education over the years. It's the whole reason I went into education, and it's the thing that I still love most about it, and it's the students. And while education reform has made it extremely challenging, and we do have to engage our legislators and make sure that they are more cognizant and more thoughtful about the way forward. In my heart, it always comes back to the students. And so I love being with students. And, if you're somebody who is compassionate about the youth of America and wants to work closely with them and with their families and just I don't know, be with the energy, the positive energy, the good energy. They haven't changed. None of that has changed. It's everything else around it that is changing or that has made it difficult. And so if you are somebody who is creative and critical and socially minded and wants to be active and involved in creating a critically civic, empathetic education, as Nicole Mira talks about, this is the field for you. And we would love to have you. We need strong voices in education. We need people who are truly concerned with the well-being of everyone in society, not just certain people and certain demographic groups within our society. And so that's the way I would frame it. It's, it has the potential to be transformative. It has the potential to be rewarding. And I love the students, and that's always what brings me back. And that's always what brings me the biggest joy. So I focus on the students.
Perfect. Denisha?
So I'm going to sum it up in 3 things that I think we need to focus on that are non-negotiable. Number 1, we have to protect our children and their childhood. We have to do whatever is right, what the research, like Julian says, that we know, what the science, whatever, all of the studies tell us that is good for children and good for their childhood. And if we center protecting children and childhood in everything that we do, we're on the right track. And then second, we have to support families. All families, we have to invest in supporting them, whether it's through housing or healthcare or jobs or the environment. We have to make supporting families, because we can't protect childhood if we don't support families. And lastly, we need to trust teachers, because they are the ones who are going to get us to where we need to be.
All right, people, thank you for this moment. Harry's running the credits. You were wonderful. I invite all 3 of you to be TED Talkers at our TEDx CCSU, because I'm going to put on a show to save our schools, and you are the voices I want. Julian, you come and hang out of the house. I'm a vegetarian too.
Let's go.
I'm going to give you some good food. And, Denisha, I'll take you to some good food. And Kara will get you some Irish food too. Yeah. My wife could get that for you. I love you. Thank you, truly from the heart. I love teachers. I love schools of ed. We can do this.
Thanks, Jesse. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
But you go be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains, haters swerving, because they ain't ready for your final version. I'm never gonna give up. For them, I just gotta get up.
This is Harry Grove, and you're listening to WNHHLP 103.5 FM New Haven.